I never thought I would end up in this situation. I had always been independent. I built my own life, made my own choices, and prided myself on taking care of myself. But life has a way of testing us. And when I hit my late 70s, things started to change. The house that had once been my sanctuary became a burden. Simple tasks that I had done without thinking suddenly felt like mountains I had to climb. The stairs seemed steeper. The floors seemed harder. The nights felt lonelier. I ignored it at first, telling myself it was just a bad day or a rough week. But deep down, I knew. I knew that something had shifted. Then came the moment that forced me to face reality. I was in the kitchen, reaching for a plate from the cabinet, when suddenly my knee gave out. I did not fall, but I came close. My hands slammed against the counter just in time. My heart was racing. And that was when I knew I could not keep pretending. I was not as steady as I used to be. And if I ignored it, I would end up just like my friend George, who swore he could take care of himself right up until the day he fell and broke his hip. He never got to come back home after that. The thought of leaving my home, my memories, my life behind sent a deep ache through my chest. But I also knew that if I kept pushing myself past my limits, I would not have a choice. That was when my daughter sat me down and said what I had been avoiding. She told me it was time to consider moving into a nursing home. She was not unkind about it. She was worried. She did not want me to struggle alone. She wanted me to be safe. And I could not argue with her. Logically, it made sense. I could not keep ignoring the signs. But emotionally, it felt like I was giving up. It felt like I was being told my life was over. That I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. That I was nothing more than an old man waiting for his days to run out. The thought of packing up my life, of leaving behind everything I had built, sent a shiver through me. I told my daughter I would think about it. But inside, I was already preparing myself for what felt like an ending. I started sorting through my belongings, deciding what I would take with me and what I would leave behind. Every item held a memory. The chair where my wife used to sit with her book. The table where we had family dinners. The old record player that had been with me since my 20s. The more I packed, the more it felt like I was erasing myself. Then, one night, something changed. I was sitting alone in my living room, staring at the half-packed boxes, when I realized something. I was making this decision based on fear. Fear of falling. Fear of struggling. Fear of being alone. And I have never been the kind of man to let fear make my choices for me. That was when I decided that before I gave up on my home, I would try something different. I would make one change. Instead of assuming I had no choice but to move, I would see if there was a way to make my home work for me. I started with the most obvious risks. The stairs. They had become my biggest challenge, but I was not ready to give up on them. So I installed a stair lift. It was a simple solution, but it made a world of difference. No more worrying about missing a step. No more exhaustion from climbing up and down all day. Suddenly, my home felt manageable again. Then I looked at the floors. I had always loved the way they looked, but the truth was, they were slippery. I replaced them with something safer. Something with grip. I added handrails in the bathroom. I swapped out my old furniture for things that were easier to get in and out of. And just like that, my home stopped being a danger and became a place I could navigate with confidence. But the biggest change was not physical. It was in my mindset. I stopped trying to do everything alone. I hired a young man from the neighborhood to help with the heavy lifting. I let my daughter arrange for a nurse to check in on me a couple of times a week. I stopped seeing help as a sign of weakness and started seeing it as a tool to keep my independence. That was the moment everything shifted. I realized I did not have to choose between struggling alone and moving into a nursing home. There was a middle ground. A way to stay in my home without putting myself at risk. As the days passed, something else happened. I started to feel lighter. The stress of trying to do everything on my own had been weighing on me more than I realized. And now that I had made adjustments, I had energy again. I started enjoying my days instead of just getting through them. I started sitting on my porch in the mornings, drinking my coffee without worrying about the day ahead. I started calling old friends, reconnecting with people I had lost touch with. I even picked up my old hobby of woodworking, something I had abandoned because I had convinced myself I was too old for it. Looking back, I see now that the biggest danger was not my home. It was the way I was thinking. I had let fear convince me that my only option was to give up everything I loved. I had let the world tell me that getting older meant losing my freedom. But that is not true. Getting older just means learning to adapt. And once I made that shift, once I stopped seeing my age as a limitation and started seeing it as something to work with, everything changed. I never moved into that nursing home. I still live in my house. I still wake up in my own bed, surrounded by the memories I spent a lifetime building. And I do it safely. Because I made the choice to adapt instead of surrender. I am not saying that moving into a nursing home is the wrong choice for everyone. For some people, it is the best decision. But what I am saying is this. Do not let fear make the decision for you. Do not assume that just because things are getting harder, you have to give up. Look at your situation. Find the parts that are challenging. And instead of seeing them as a reason to leave, ask yourself how you can change them. That one change saved me. Not just from moving, but from losing myself. I feel stronger now than I have in years. Not because I refused help, but because I embraced it in the right way. Not because I held on to my pride, but because I was willing to make adjustments. That is the real secret to aging well. Knowing when to hold on. Knowing when to adapt. And knowing that just because the world tells you it is time to give up, that does not mean you have to listen. Now, let's clear some common questions. How did making this one change affect not just your living situation, but your overall quality of life? I did not realize how much fear had crept into my life until I made the change. It had started slowly. A hesitation before stepping into the shower. A moment of doubt before climbing the stairs. A second thought before reaching for something on a high shelf. I told myself I was just being cautious. That I was simply adjusting to age. But in reality, I was living in a quiet kind of fear. The kind that does not announce itself loudly but instead settles into the small spaces of daily life. It was not until I faced the possibility of leaving my home that I truly understood what was happening. The day my daughter sat me down and said we needed to talk about moving to a nursing home, I felt something deep inside me crack. Not just sadness. Not just worry. Something more than that. A feeling that I was on the edge of losing something I could never get back. My independence. My freedom. My sense of self. I did not argue with her. I listened. And part of me even agreed. I knew things were becoming harder. I knew that living alone came with risks. And I knew that the last thing I wanted was to fall and become a burden on my family. But at the same time, I was not ready to surrender. Not yet. I went to bed that night feeling heavy. Not just with the weight of the decision in front of me, but with the realization that I had let my life shrink without even noticing. I had stopped doing things I once enjoyed. I had started measuring my days by what I could no longer do rather than what I still could. That was when I asked myself the most important question. Was moving really the only option? Or was there another way? That thought led to the one change that would alter everything. Instead of accepting that my home was no longer safe, I decided to make it safe. Instead of believing that my independence was slipping away, I found a way to hold on to it. The changes were practical at first. I installed a stair lift so I would not have to worry about climbing steps. I replaced my old floors with non-slip surfaces. I added grab bars in the bathroom, changed my furniture to make moving around easier, and even hired a young man from the neighborhood to help with the chores that had become difficult. But what I did not expect was how these small adjustments would lead to something much greater. Once my home was no longer a place of struggle, something inside me shifted. The fear that had been lurking in the background began to fade. I stopped worrying about what might happen every time I moved from one room to another. And when the fear disappeared, something else took its place. Confidence. Freedom. A sense of control over my own life. I woke up feeling lighter. I stopped spending my days thinking about what could go wrong and started thinking about what I wanted to do with my time. I sat outside on my porch in the mornings with my coffee, no longer preoccupied with thoughts of whether I should sell the house. I started inviting friends over again, knowing I could move around comfortably without embarrassment. I even started taking small walks outside, something I had stopped doing because I was too afraid of falling. The biggest change, though, was not just in my home or my routines. It was in how I saw myself. Before making this one adjustment, I had started thinking of myself as someone who needed to step aside. Someone whose best years were behind him. Someone who had to accept that life was slowing down. But after reclaiming my space and my confidence, I started to realize that my life was not over. Not even close. I picked up my old hobbies again. I started working with wood, something I had always loved but had let go of because I thought I no longer had the energy. I reconnected with people I had lost touch with. I even joined a community group, something I never would have done when I was living in that quiet fear. One of the most surprising effects of this change was how it strengthened my relationships. Before, my daughter had been worried about me all the time. She had seen my hesitation, my struggles, and it had made her feel helpless. She had believed that moving me to a nursing home was the only way to keep me safe. But once I took action and made my home work for me, everything changed between us. She saw me not as someone who needed to be taken care of, but as someone who was still capable, still strong. Our conversations became lighter. She stopped looking at me with concern and started talking to me the way she always had. And that meant more to me than I can ever explain. The most powerful lesson I learned from this experience is that aging does not mean giving up control. It does not mean surrendering to limitations. It means adapting. It means looking at challenges and finding solutions rather than resigning yourself to what seems inevitable. I had convinced myself that my struggles meant the end of my independence. But in reality, all I needed was a shift in thinking. A willingness to make a change. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I do not feel trapped by my circumstances. I feel free. Not just because I am still in my home, but because I know I made the choice that was right for me. Because I know I did not let fear dictate the course of my life. And that, more than anything else, has given me peace. If there is one thing I want others to understand from my experience, it is this. Do not assume that just because something seems like the only option, it actually is. There is always another way. Another choice. A way to hold on to the things that matter most. It is not about refusing help. It is not about pretending that aging does not come with challenges. It is about finding solutions that allow you to keep living on your terms. Making that one change did not just keep me in my home. It gave me my life back. And I would not trade that for anything in the world. If you could go back and talk to yourself during the most difficult moment of this process, what would you say? If I could go back and talk to myself during the hardest moment of this process, I know exactly what I would say. I would look that version of myself straight in the eye and tell him to take a deep breath. To stop drowning in the fear of what might happen and start focusing on what he can do. I would remind him that he has faced challenges before. That this is not the first time life has thrown him a curveball. And just like every other time, he has a choice. He can give in to fear, or he can find a way forward. I would tell him that it is okay to feel afraid. That it is normal to feel uncertain when life starts shifting in ways you did not expect. That the weight in his chest, the feeling of losing control, is something every person faces at some point. But I would also tell him that this fear does not define him. That just because something feels overwhelming now does not mean it will always feel this way. That the worst thing he can do is make decisions based on fear alone. I would remind him of the strength he has forgotten. The way he has always found solutions when times got tough. The way he has always adapted, even when he thought he could not. I would tell him to look back on his life and see all the moments he thought he would not get through, but did. And I would ask him to trust that this is no different. That even though it feels like everything is slipping away, he still has more power than he realizes. I would tell him to stop seeing this moment as the end of something and start seeing it as the beginning of something new. That aging is not about loss, but about change. And that change, while uncomfortable, is not always a bad thing. That just because his body is not as strong as it once was does not mean his spirit has to weaken too. That he is still the same man who built a life for himself. The same man who worked hard, who loved deeply, who fought through challenges and came out the other side stronger. I would tell him to stop looking at his home as an enemy. To stop seeing the stairs as a mountain, the bathroom as a hazard, the daily tasks as impossible burdens. Instead, I would tell him to see them as puzzles that can be solved. Adjustments that can be made. I would tell him that he does not have to do everything the way he used to, but that does not mean he has to stop doing them altogether. That there is a way to keep his independence without putting himself in danger. I would remind him that asking for help is not weakness. That accepting support does not mean he is losing his dignity. That making changes to his home, hiring someone to assist with certain tasks, or relying on family is not a failure. It is wisdom. It is choosing to make life easier instead of making it harder on himself for the sake of pride. I would tell him to think about all the times in his life when he helped someone else, and how he never once saw them as weak for needing it. And then I would ask him why he is so unwilling to show himself the same kindness. I would tell him that the hardest moments in life are not the ones where we fall. They are the moments when we convince ourselves we cannot get back up. I would remind him that he has more choices than he thinks. That this is not just a story about whether he stays in his home or moves somewhere else. This is about how he chooses to live. He can spend his days worrying about what might go wrong, or he can take action to make things right. I would tell him that the world will try to convince him that aging is about shrinking. About stepping aside. About accepting that life has passed him by. And I would tell him that the world is wrong. That aging is not about disappearing. It is about learning to live differently. It is about making choices that allow him to keep moving forward instead of standing still in fear. It is about finding ways to make life enjoyable again, instead of just survivable. I would tell him that he is not alone. That even though it feels like he is the only one struggling with this, there are others who have faced the same crossroads. Who have felt the same uncertainty. Who have found ways to create a life they love, even when the circumstances were not what they expected. And if they could do it, so can he. I would remind him that this moment is temporary. That the fear, the doubt, the exhaustion will pass. That the choices he makes now will shape the way he experiences the years ahead. And I would ask him what kind of life he wants to build for himself. Does he want to spend his days in frustration, resisting the reality of his situation? Or does he want to take control and make choices that bring him peace? I would tell him that he is still capable of joy. That life is not over just because it looks different now. That he still has time to enjoy the things he loves. To reconnect with old friends. To pick up old hobbies. To wake up in the morning and feel excited about the day instead of dreading it. But none of that will happen if he lets fear make his decisions for him. I would tell him to take the first step. To stop waiting for things to get better on their own and start making the changes that will allow him to live with confidence again. I would tell him that he does not have to do it all at once. That even small adjustments will make a difference. That progress is progress, no matter how slow. And finally, I would tell him that he is going to be okay. That no matter what choice he makes, he will find a way forward. That he has already come so far, and this is just another chapter in his story. And I would tell him to trust himself. Because if there is one thing he has always been, it is resilient. And that has not changed. Not now. Not ever. What do you hope people, both younger and older, learn from your story about aging, independence, and making choices for their future? If there is one thing I hope people learn from my story, both the young and the old, it is that aging is not about giving up. It is not about surrendering to limitations or letting fear decide the rest of your life. It is about adaptation, about making choices that honor who you are while respecting the realities of change. It is about independence, not as the stubborn refusal to accept help, but as the wisdom to create a life where you are in control of how you live, no matter your circumstances. For the young, I hope my story teaches them that aging is not something to fear but something to prepare for. Too many people live as if old age is something that happens to other people. They rush through life assuming they will always be strong, always be capable, always be the ones making decisions for others rather than having decisions made for them. And then, one day, they wake up and realize they are no longer the ones helping but the ones needing help. And because they never thought it would happen, they are unprepared. They feel lost, confused, even ashamed. I want young people to understand that the choices they make today will shape their future. That taking care of their health, strengthening their relationships, and planning for their later years is not something to put off until it is too late. It is something to embrace now, while they have the time to do it right. I hope young people learn that growing older does not mean losing who you are. Too often, I see younger generations looking at older people with pity, as if life past a certain age is just a slow decline into irrelevance. But I want them to know that the fire inside a person does not dim just because their body changes. We still feel, still dream, still laugh, and still have wisdom and stories to share. We are not just memories of who we used to be. We are still living, still experiencing, still growing in ways that may not be obvious to younger eyes. I hope they take the time to listen, to ask questions, to understand that the older people in their lives are not burdens but treasures. For those who are older, I hope my story reminds them that independence is not about doing everything alone. Too many people hold on to the idea that asking for help means weakness. That accepting changes to their lifestyle means admitting defeat. But that is not true. Real independence is about making the right choices for yourself. It is about recognizing when something is not working and having the courage to do something about it. It is about making adjustments that allow you to keep living life on your own terms, rather than waiting until circumstances force a choice upon you. I want older people to understand that fear is the biggest enemy of a good life. Fear of change. Fear of needing help. Fear of losing dignity. But the truth is, refusing to face reality only creates more problems. When I first realized my home was becoming difficult to manage, I resisted making any changes. I told myself I could still handle everything, even as simple tasks became harder. I let pride convince me that making adjustments meant I was giving up. But once I made that one change, once I adapted my home to work for me instead of against me, my whole life improved. I want others to understand that making adjustments is not about losing independence. It is about protecting it. I also hope people learn that aging is not just about survival. It is about continuing to find joy. Too many older people settle into routines that revolve around avoiding risk rather than living fully. They stop doing the things they love because they assume they no longer can. They isolate themselves because they fear becoming a burden. They let their world shrink until their days are filled with nothing but caution and waiting. But life is not meant to be endured. It is meant to be lived. I want older people to understand that they still have time to enjoy life. That hobbies, friendships, love, and laughter do not expire at a certain age. That every day is an opportunity to embrace what is still possible instead of mourning what has changed. For both the young and the old, I hope my story is a reminder that planning for the future is not just about finances or medical care. It is about creating a life that you will still want to live. Too many people focus only on making sure they have enough money to survive in old age but do not think about what they actually want their later years to look like. They do not think about where they want to live, what kind of support system they will need, or how they will keep themselves engaged and happy. And then, when the time comes, they find themselves stuck in situations they never wanted simply because they did not plan for anything different. I want people to understand that aging is not something that happens all at once. It is a gradual process, and the more thought you put into it early on, the more control you will have over it later. I hope people of all ages learn that the most important thing about aging is mindset. If you believe that growing older means losing everything that makes life worth living, then that is exactly what will happen. But if you believe that growing older is just another phase of life, one that comes with its own challenges but also its own joys, then you will find ways to keep moving forward with strength and purpose. Above all, I hope my story teaches people that they are never powerless. That no matter what stage of life they are in, they always have choices. That life is not about what happens to you, but how you respond to it. And if there is one thing I know for certain, it is that a person who refuses to give up, who refuses to let fear control their decisions, will always find a way to live with dignity, purpose, and joy. If you liked today's discussion, don't forget to like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to stay updated with every video we release. And yes, don't forget to share your experiences and thoughts in the comments. Every comment is special to us. Your feedback helps us improve further. We'll continue to meet you in every new video on this channel, so until next time, take care.